The following is an audio recording documenting the 119th Pennsylvania's experience at the Battle of Salem Church on May 3, 1863. The following reading is taken from a historical fiction which covers the 119th Pennsylvania's military experience during the American Civil War. At this point in the story, the 119th Pennsylvania is about to face their first real test of battle in the American Civil War. Note: later on May 3rd, the 119th Pennsylvania would be engaged in a furious battle near Salem Church, just 5 miles outside of the city. The following was written by this author after the war, recalling the specific events of the Battle of Salem Church. After Marie's Heights, we pursued the retreating rebels on Orange Plank Road. The 95th Pennsylvania and 119th Pennsylvania separated from our brigade, so we followed behind the 1st and 3rd New Jersey regiments. The drummer of Company I, who just returned from the regiment, began to play a patriotic anthem with his drum. The whole regiment marched in step, rather than the more comfortable, disorganized pace we usually kept on longer marches. The recent victories we felt over the past couple of days intensified our resolve. Admittedly, it instilled a sense of confidence inside us that would soon prove dangerous to the regiment later that evening. Most of the advance on Orange Plank Road consisted of our brigade chasing away rebel skirmishers. The road ahead seemed clear. We followed Colonel Town of the 95th Pennsylvania. Town was a printer and member of Philadelphia's own Washington Blues militia before the war. We wintered with his regiment this past year, so the 119th felt very comfortable with Town's leadership. We were the only 2 regiments representing the Red Cross 6 Corps badge, so everyone wore it proudly, being honored with the distinction. The brigade received skirmish fire from the wooded heights nearby Salem Church, a single structure which stood ahead of a hilly forest. Colonel Town deployed our Pennsylvania regiments off of the road to the right, so we could support the 1st and 3rd New Jersey as they met the rebel threat. Town ordered the regiment to lay down as some of the rebel fire made its way towards the lines. James and Jory laid next to me on either side. We quietly marched as the 3rd New Jersey Infantry approached the wood line in open order. Tall grass waved in the spring breeze, and the setting sun made it difficult to watch the advance. Suddenly, a roar came from the woods. A volley erupted from the wood line. It cut through the ranks of the 3rd New Jersey like a blade. Spent rounds traveled the 400 yards distance between the 3rd New Jersey and our regiment, sailing over our heads. Some used bullets bounced their way back into the faces and heads of the 119th. My gut sank with the immediate realization that multiple rebel regiments were waiting inside those woods. Orders and bugle calls were made. Lieutenant Rodney ran down our company line and ordered us to rise up. The expression on his face sent chills down my spine. His rigid deportment was unusual, reminding everyone that we were going to catch hell today. Everyone stood up, mesmerized by the image unfolding before us. We watched as the 3rd New Jersey ran across the field and sought cover behind a fenced road which crossed in our front. Another Confederate volley turned that wooden fence into a tornado of splinters and blood. They were literally being cut into pieces by Minié balls. Most of us were uninitiated to the sight. It was our first time seeing dozens of men get killed at once. The display impacts every man differently, of course. Drew was shielding his eyes. Despite every instinct from my upbringing telling me to do the same, I couldn't look away. The regiment bugle sounded for us to fix bayonets. Everyone complied with an anxious sense of duty. Colonel Town and Colonel Elmaker both ran ahead of the line as we locked blades into place. Lieutenant Rodney and other officers shoved their way ahead of us. "Battalion, forward, march!" 400 yards ahead of us, the New Jersey Volunteers screamed their carnage, and we had to cover that distance. We moved as one silently, with hearts pounding, the grass trampled beneath our feet, disrupting the bugs who buzzed and swarmed ahead of our ranks like clouds of locusts. The smell of powder and bloody meat hit the line with a slight breeze in the air, wrinkling our noses. Sergeant Timoney was grabbing onto Martino to keep him flush with the line. Some of us walked faster than others, because nobody desired to be in this open field for the rebel volleys. The 3rd New Jersey returned fire, keeping the Confederates down so our line could safely cross the open ground. The pounding of my chest could be felt in my throat. Every step sparked a painful palpitation in my head. Everyone in the line watched as the 3rd New Jersey endured punishing volleys from the wood line. To our left, the battle for Salem Church itself was erupting. The entire brigade was engaged. After the rest of General Hooker's army was defeated at Chancellorsville, Lee concentrated his forces to smash our 6th Corps here at Salem Church. This was our first proper battle, the first test. As our Pennsylvania regiments drew closer, the 3rd New Jersey charged forward into the woods. We were surprised at their overwhelming bravery, so some of us marched faster. Sergeants began to yell at us to remain in line. Sergeant Greco restrained Mickens by his leathers and kept him back, flush with our line. He surely remembered how he had upset Lieutenant Rodney a few days earlier with his eagerness to rush forward. Everyone was fighting the instinct to rush forward to support New Jersey. "Son of a bitch, let us help him!" cursed Jory. Martino snapped back. "You're not going anywhere. Keep with the pace, Philadelphia." More people were in the ranks and gave words of encouragement. "Come on, Philly." "We're almost there, Philly." "Grays, stick together." Colonel Town interrupted with a yell, and the bugle call for the double quick was sounded. That is all we needed to hear. The regiment surged forward at a quicker pace. Sergeant Timoney yelled, "Right shoulder shift!" "This is it, Philadelphia! Into those woods with New Jersey!" barked Sergeant Greco. Everyone obeyed, raising their rifles high on their shoulders. The bouncing of our trot intensified my headache, but it unleashed a surge of energy that captivated my senses. It momentarily desensitized me as we approached the dead and dying of the 3rd New Jersey. I dodged and hopped over the dying, while some slipped in the gore. Shards of the wooden fence, rifles, equipment, and bleeding men stood as obstacles for our regiment. Jory lost his footing and stumbled, but the elder who was in the rear rank picked him back up, kicking him by accident in the process. The road in which the 3rd New Jersey took cover behind was now drenched in streams of blood and heaps of corpses. My courage carried me through some of the distressing obstacles to our line. Wounded soldiers, Some of the New Jersey wounded tried to stop us, screaming for help. James later told me that one wounded man held onto his leg, begging for water. Just like many other Pennsylvanians, we had to kick them off. Christian related to us later how he had unwittingly broken the fingers of a poor soul beneath his feet. The boy wept that he would never play the piano again, even though his legs are shattered. The 119th and 95th Pennsylvania were needed forward. Martino exclaimed words of encouragement to the New Jersey wounded. "Here comes your friends from the other side of the Schuylkill. We have your backs, New Jersey. We always will." As we cleared the road, the looming wilderness stood over our regiments. Hell was being raised inside the thickets. We could barely see the 3rd New Jersey, but a grand fight was happening inside those dark trees. The sun was setting behind the woods. It felt to many as if the trees were eating us whole. Curiously, I was reminded of the old German fairy tales that Mother told me as a youth when we made the dash into the darkness. Such nefarious things have always happened in dark forests in these stories. I swore that I could hear a witch's laughter over the storm of fire, or the shrieking of spirits mixing with those that lay wounded among the gloomy timber. To this day, I have no explanation for why my mind conjured up these images amongst such exciting horror. In no time, the 119th was completely enveloped by small brush and trees. Dead and dying Confederate soldiers were strewn all around our feet, forcing us to repeat the same neglectful advance. Our regiment was trained on achieving its mission. But where was the 3rd New Jersey? The bugle for a halt sounded, so we did. The commanding officers all retreated behind our battle line. Lieutenant Rodney shoved his way past me with a noticeable electricity in his eyes. I nearly dropped my rifle with the force of his push. Were we alone? Smoke and evening darkness masked our vision. All we could make out is that we were at the bottom of a hill inside the woodline. Our ears were more useful than our eyes. We had to strain them to listen beyond the weeping of dying men. A momentary silence hit our line as everyone examined the high ground and listened for Confederate soldiers. The crackling of branches and clanking of canteens on metal could be heard ahead of us. Our officers ordered us to face to the right oblique. All eyes focused to our right. The dissipating smoke revealed a line of Confederate infantry. Rows of butternut and gray dominated the wooded hillside. I noticed that they had their bayonets fixed. This made me sick to my stomach. These were seasoned, well-tested soldiers. Their discipline was firm, their step easy. Not one man seemed to be moved by our presence. "Ready!" I cocked my rifle. "Aim!" My target was not a singular person. It was a mass of humanity flowing down the hill. "Fire!" Hundreds of our muskets fired a wave of coordinated death, sounding off the first major volley that we had dealt to the Confederacy in this entire rebellion. It felt exhilarating. Many of us were waiting for this moment to finally deal our fury towards the slavocracy. Automatically, my rifle was lowered in between my feet, and I began to reload. Christian turned his head towards us, barking encouragement. "Get to work, boys!" A silent determination carried us as we reloaded. A job needed to be done. Ramrods could be heard up and down our line, clinking and swooping down the muzzles of our rifles. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Our line drew the attention of the Confederate soldiers all along the high ground. We couldn't see anything because our volley obscured our vision with thick gun smoke. I could barely see 6 feet in our front. A wounded Confederate leaning against the nearby tree was screaming in terror, yelling for us to stop. Our response to our volley came almost immediately. From all directions in our front, death rained down. Tree branches fell on the heads of the 119th as we reloaded, obstructing our objective. It sounded like a swarm of buzzed hornets when bullets rushed past our bodies. Some were hit many times by rebel Minet balls. The sound of spongy cracking and yelps were heard all up our line. Some fell forward, while others twisted in a dance of death. Many fell straight down, the burden of life suddenly cast off. A sudden panic hit everyone in the line because the battering did not stop. Men were being thrown with such force from the bullets, one would think that a Philly street trolley plowed through our line. James and I ran to the nearest tree to seek cover, but had to fight for the safest position. People along the sides of the trees were being picked off. One man's canteen was hit, blasting it in the air like a cracked whip. The sound of the bullet rebounding and rolling inside the metal canteen created a peculiar whooping sound. The thumping and whizzing of bullets overtook the regiment. It was a cauldron of death. We could tell that the Confederate line in front of us was just as deadly as we had feared. They committed murder with the expertise of years and the resolve of those who knew their work well. Lieutenant Rodney emerged from our rear to reform the company. With everyone clumped up behind the trees, the line was broken and vulnerable to a rebel bayonet charge. Rodney's back was towards the enemy, and he faced us with a commanding presence. He was afraid, but he was doing his job. Our line must not be broken. Our little section reformed to Rodney's instruction. Gunsmoke surrounded us like a bubble, so nobody had the slightest clue of where the rebels were. It is a fearful thing to endure fire when one doesn't know where it's coming from. My heart was pounding with such intensity that my vision was blurring. Another one will come. Suddenly, the air shook with another wall of buzzing lead. The wind from this new volley could be felt on our faces. It was such an intense force of man-made nature. Lieutenant Rodney was hit in the back of the head, his neck snapping forward from the force of the blow. The ball plunged speedily through his flesh, finding escape through Rodney's mouth, showering Drew with bits of teeth, jawbone, and fleshy vitriol. Stunned, I attempted to run forward to pick up my friend. He was squirming on the root of a tall tree, his back bent fiercely in shock. There was no way he could be left to die there. The shooting stopped, and yelling began. The more numerous Confederates wished to drive us out with the bayonet. Although we could not see them, their rebel yell rose shrieking in the air, and it was approaching rapidly, traveling down the heights, ricocheting off the trees. "We gotta go, Dutch!" Jory grabbed my blouse and pulled me back. It was a good thing he did, because rebel bayonets were becoming visible behind the swirling gun smoke. Everyone ran. The 119th and 95th Pennsylvania were completely broken. My first objective was to reach the wood line. Rounds were hitting the trees in front of me, dropping pine needles and shards of wood everywhere. Gripping my rifle, I made it into the field. We raced towards the road with bullets passing all around our feet. Private John Faust of Company H was hit in his right heel. The ball broke out the top of his shoe. Faust's right leg jutted forward in a kicking motion, twirling him around hard into the grass. It was chaos. I saw some of the Greys discard their haversacks and gear to flee quicker. I threw my canteen off without thinking how important it would be in the next few days. We skedaddled past the road and sped headlong into the 400 yards of ground we naively occupied 10 minutes ago. Our artillery, which normally doesn't fire shells over our heads, made an exception this time. They halted the rebel counterattack and covered our retreat. We reformed our line and cheered on the slower ones than us. Quick, get over here, you can do it! At this distance, most of these stragglers made it. Some went down to Confederate musketry. Our artillery provided cover for those hurt who could hobble their way back. Sergeant Greco ordered survivors of his platoon to help the walking wounded over. Our NCOs maintained order, and we had a moment to breathe. One by one, captains and lieutenants returned to bring order to our line. Colonel Elmaker reappeared in our midst, pale as a ghost. Unfortunately for the 95th Pennsylvania, their Colonel Town did not return. His brother, Major Thomas Jefferson Brown, in the 95th, was wounded as he attempted to recover the dying colonel from danger. I felt a sudden panic for the Galusha brothers of Jory's mess, fearing that they met a similar fate. By God's mercy, they were spared. They were to be seen running together back to They were to be seen running together back to our lines. The left side of Christian's face covered in blood, George's right sleeve tattered. Some survivors were in the line and yelling in frustration. The sound of crying and yelling could be heard as corporals and sergeants held desperate soldiers back who weren't as lucky, raving mad that they left a friend behind. Panting, I watched helplessly as Federal guns churned up the wood line we ran from. We left so many behind there, only to be killed by friendly shells. Nightfall quickly engulfed the battlefield. Small forest fires from our fighting erupted, illuminating the area in all its ghastly horror. The shadows of those struggling in the distance were telling of a great horror occurring in those woods. I looked up to the sky. It was a full moon.